Hello, welcome to Fireside Chats. My name is Magela Pillai, and today I would like to introduce you to Sister Denise, who has been practicing Rajyoga Meditation for over 40 years. Today's topic is entitled Words for the Intangible. In this series, we look at a variety of subjects surrounding spirituality. We look at what spirituality is and is not. We shatter some illusions that people may have had regarding the subject, and we ask you specifically to look at what your relationship is with yourself, and by that I mean your heart, your intellect, your mind, as well as examine your relationship with God, whomsoever you believe him to be. Is God just a name, a concept, a title to you, or do you have a real, meaningful, and fulfilling relationship with him? Sister Denise, a very warm welcome to today's show.
Thank you.
So, words of the intangible, words for the intangible. Why is it necessary to have a spiritual vocabulary?
I think the main problem with language is, well, it's an organic thing. It is created by the people who use it. And the people who use language, all people, they see there are either males or females. So language is gender-based and usually gender-biased. And it's not possible to find, a pronoun for a soul, which is genderless.
Sister Denise, repeat those two terms. It's gender?
Gender-based and gender-biased.
Okay.
So gender-biased means usually the male gender is positioned in a dominant role over the female gender regardless. And gender-based means, that, like, take for example the Hindi language. If you're a woman, you say main karti hoon for I am doing. If you're a man, you say main karta hoon. And so just as soon as you open your mouth, you're saying this is what my gender is, and your gender is your identity. And so you get a gender-based society or a gender-biased society. So then one gender is in a dominant role, one gender is in a subservient role, and this creates an imbalance. If you would have a grammatical arrangement and pronouns that refer to the soul, so that you have a pronoun for beings and a pronoun for things, it's different. And so if you're soul conscious, you would use language which says, I'm a soul. But, if you're in English, you say, this soul thinks this. It sounds so weird, because part of the word I means I, the ego. And if you want to say, when I'm using the word I'm in my consciousness of the soul, just by language you can't indicate that. It has to be more by vibration or something like this. When you want to talk about God, the normal thing is you say he, but then people say, well, is God a him? And God will say, well, I'm genderless, I'm your father, I'm your mother, I'm your sister, I'm your brother, I can be everything to you in terms of all relationships. And so then what pronoun do you use? There isn't one. Do you say you, thou? And so people are trying to figure out some language that will work. Sometimes, okay, you'll capitalize the word God and that's somehow more respectful. Or you have to find some devices, but otherwise, when you're just dealing with language as it's normally used, it really indicates the consciousness with which you use it, which is that you are body conscious, materialistic, and driven by material values. And so the language reflects that.
Okay. Sister Denise, why is it necessary to have this vocabulary? Because people have been plodding along fine or not fine without one. What purpose does a words for the intangible or a spiritual vocabulary serve? I assume it does have a purpose.
Well, if you say, I love you from the bottom of my heart, does that mean your blood pump? Or what does that mean, you know? Because the heart is an intangible part of your being, but you use the word heart, and so that has the other connotation of, you know, heart. It doesn't really take you right away to core of your being. We don't know what the core is. We don't know what the being is. It's vague, you see. So then we will use a language, we'll use a vocabulary that's an approximation or which is analogous. I feel in my heart, therefore my soul is my heart. No, this is faulty logic, but the language is used to such an extent that the logic is discarded and the sort of the linguistic misrepresentation takes precedence. And then what happens after that is people use language in a fuzzy way, and then they start to think in a fuzzy way, and the thinking becomes very imprecise about the intangible things. So the requirement of a vocabulary for the intangible is it enables you to be more precise. But I don't think you would evolve a language for the intangible until you have clarity about the intangible. So in Rajyoga, according to Brahmakumaris, we talk so much about different aspects of the consciousness, but it's difficult to know exactly what you mean. You know, there are many languages which don't distinguish between consciousness and conscience. There's a huge difference in English, but not in French or Spanish, you know. In German language you have masculine, feminine, neuter, but in English you just have one thing. In French, Italian, Spanish you have masculine, feminine. You know, how do you know the table is female? La table.
Yeah, okay.
You know, la tasse. Well, maybe things that contain things, they're females, like boats and cars and cups, you know. But then clocks, the clock is female. Who says, you know, the tree is masculine, the curtain is masculine, the wall is masculine, the chair is feminine, you know. So, I mean, there's something in the human psyche that looks at things according to their masculine and feminine attributes. And so God is pushed more and more into the masculine end of things. And the soul, you see, like in India, Purush means a man, it also means a soul. So does that mean that women don't have souls? Well, a lot of people say, well, obviously women don't have souls. Well, that's not obvious at all. You see, so it creates confusion. And then that confusion leads to biases and preconceptions and fixed ideas, which cause people to dehumanize each other, and then it becomes harmful.
Yes, Denise, it is a very deep need within the human psyche to be understood. I personally believe that there are a number of people on the planet who prefer to be understood rather than being loved. Okay, but that's just my personal view. How does having a spiritual vocabulary come to the assistance of such individuals who hitherto felt misunderstood?
I think that if you're understood, if you feel understood, if you feel seen, that is a degree of love that is much higher than affectionate behavior. Because it's deep.
So you agree?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, yeah.
Because the self is something very, very deep, very internal, and then you always have some masks, you know, and people look at you, they say, well, you're dressed like this, therefore you are this, but maybe not. Or you speak like this, therefore you are this. You know, it's kind of categorizing, boxing, putting people into classifications that limit, you see. Whereas if you feel that someone has really seen you, the core of your being, it's like you come alive. And that's a very, very special thing.
Okay.
But that all depends on consciousness, you see. We talk about soul consciousness and body consciousness. Well, you can have a body conscious soul, and you can have a soul conscious soul, you know, and you can have a, you don't know what that means, you see, because the vocabulary that you use, say in English, we're using terminology that has been loosely translated from Hindi, which is the original language in which all this material comes. And when you have a loose translation, then there's a lot of room for interpretation or misinterpretation. And so then you have to really sit with the dictionary, you have to sit with how these terms are used, you know, like take, for example, the word swaman. You see, swa means the self and man means respect, so they put it together and that's self-respect, but it isn't. It's assertiveness. It's not the same as self-respect, or it's self-honor, which is different, you see. And so unless you have the leisure to sit with a number of different ways to translate, you know, and translators, professional translators know about this, but other people, they just take it at face value and they think, well, that's the only way you can do it. So it becomes very limiting. So I think that you know, if a person does extend and expand their vocabulary and play with different languages, then you can get all the nuances. And you know, I'm a translator, so I spend a lot of time with these different concepts and seeing, okay, you know, it doesn't translate exactly from one culture to another because people think differently in different cultures. And so you have to find something which is the closest thing, which is equivalent not just in terms of meaning, but also in terms of use, you know.
Okay.
And because there's vast cultural differences, there's vast differences, you know, the way different people of different religions think about spiritual matters is very culturally based. And so, you know, to have good understanding between religions is very difficult.
Is it, Denise, nomenclature is not necessarily high on the agenda of many people, because I know many people who use language simply as a means to an end, okay, who say anything just so that they can get there and take the shortest possible route, whereas somebody like you places emphasis on language and communication. That being said, with spiritual terminology, how important is understanding spiritual nomenclature, part and parcel of reaching a depth within your spiritual practice that's meaningful to you?
My feeling is that when you have words that refer to very specific concepts, it's better to leave it in the original. And so what you have, say in the English language, you have a lot of words, I mean, which are from other languages. They get, like karma is now an English word.
Yes, still, you know? Yes. Yes.
And there are many like that. And then within, you see, the spiritual vocabulary, the Hindi language and the Sanskrit language have tons of words for different aspects of consciousness and meditation and bodilessness and subtle trance, visionary, all of this type of thing, which in the English language, they may have words for something like that, but they don't go exactly. You see, And then there are concepts. You see, there are, like, for example, some people, they use the word sadgati in Hindi. They'll translate that as salvation because it sounds similar, but it doesn't mean the same. So there are some people who feel that the onomatopoeic value is real, but just because it sounds like something, it doesn't mean it has the same meaning, you see. And so you have to look at, now, what does this word really mean in the context of the English-speaking world, and what are you trying to say? Are you trying to, take a word that belongs to one religion and then put it into another religious, cultural context and expect to get away with it? I would say that's not a good idea, you see, because the different religions in this world, they really take themselves very seriously, and they need for their vocabulary to be properly used. And in that case, I think it's much better to keep the word in the language of the religion that it's connected with, and then give a parenthesis with an English explanation. I think that's better, more respectful, and more helpful for a person to understand the concept that's represented by the word. Because when you're too loose, you can make some big mistakes and cause some ill feeling in people, and that's important.
Yes, so Denise, how does, in the context in which you just described, how does one go from the use of language to being understood to feelings? Because I think at the end of the day, spirituality, like you shared in a previous episode, is not theory, it's an experience. Tell us how you use language to give yourself and others an experience. And as I'm speaking, my mind goes to the various meditation commentaries that I've heard you do on this show and on other shows. Very beautiful meditation commentaries.
When you're meditating on a word, say love. I think every language has a word for love, and they usually have many words for different aspects of love. And love is also a word that refers to one of the original intrinsic qualities of God. So that means it contains within itself the promise of great depth if you will meditate on it. Because a word has a resonance, has a meaning which carries with itself, and emotions that go with it. And so when you think about a word, which is also a concept, which is also an experience, which is also an attitude and a motivation and all that, by thinking about it, you are causing all of those layers of meaning to manifest themselves in the atmosphere around you, and you create an atmosphere. And then it reflects back to you, so you start feeling it, you see. It starts with thinking about it in your intellect, and then you give it life, and then it starts dancing around you and comes back to you. And then you say, yeah, the word I use is knowing. Because if you understand something and you feel it, then you know it.
If you understand something and you feel it, then you know it.
I would say.
You have made it your own.
Yes, and it's not just theoretical, and it's not just a wordless feeling, but there is this both sides, the understanding side and the feeling side, which have come together. And so that combination, I call it in my language, Denise, knowing. Because sometimes you have to invent because it isn't already there, so then you have to make it up.
Okay. So Denise, in this world, you get the category of people who, the expression goes, do not walk their talk.
Yes.
Okay, so then you get people who are able to think, who are able to articulate, but not to translate that into behavior. That lacks the integrity that you mentioned in a previous episode. Within spirituality, okay, let me put it this way, one can, I think, get away with it in other spheres, but I don't think one can get away with that in spirituality, can one? Because spirituality and superficiality are antonyms, are they not?
Absolutely.
Okay, so how, say if one's ego pulls oneself in that direction, and by that I mean superficial, and you're superficial, and you want to become real. In other words, you want to take your understanding, you want to take your words, and you want to put it into your behavior. How does one make that happen, make it real?
I think it might even be worthwhile looking at the other way. How did you get so superficial?
That's a very painful exercise.
Well, because that's going to give you much better insight than how do you change from superficial to real. Because you don't start off superficial.
No, we all start off real. All children are real.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what happened?
A mask as a result of trauma, pain, coping mechanism.
Exactly. So you have to go there to return to the real you from which you departed for whatever reason. So it's not really going from superficial to real, but you have to come back to yourself, and that journey is most definitely a painful journey because you did it to avoid feeling your pain, and in so doing you lost yourself. So you have to find yourself back again through your pain, because you have to go back the same way you came out. Now, who wants to do that? Anyone will avoid it as much as possible unless they feel that their superficiality is more painful than the pain of going back to their realness. When that happens, they'll do it.
True. Okay.
So that's original pain work, which is psychological work. But the psychological and the spiritual, in many ways, they really dovetail into each other. One of the difficulties is that, the psychological disciplines are involved in a medical arena, and the spiritual is outside the range of regular university teachings. So the psychological and the spiritual have become divorced from each other. And that is a pity because they belong together,
Okay.
And I think that you, if you want to develop yourself spiritually, one of the things you have to do is address your psychological issues before you can actually get to your spiritual depth. And when the two disciplines are placed in different camps where there is no connection, then you're fairly hard put to it to cross over that divide.
So Denise, God, because God is intangible, all the vocabulary surrounding him will also be words that most of us are not aware of. So,
not necessarily.
Say more?
Well, the problem with God being intangible is then you say, well, God is unknowable.
Okay.
And then anybody who says anything about God is by definition wrong. And then, but you still say things about God, but they're very vague. And then it's difficult because people don't know God. And God is to be known, can be known, But you have to be still, you have to be patient, you have to be deep, you have to be, on the same level. And most people, they don't go there. And, those who do go there and they move into the sphere of mysticism, they may go to a dimension so far away from the common dimension that people say, well, I can't go there, that's too far away, So, but still, God is very accessible, and even though God is subtle, God will still say, well, I'm your father, and I'm your mother, and I'm your teacher, and I'm your friend, so we could talk, And so the thing I think that is helpful is to form a conversation, form a relationship, so that you can sort of invoke and bring into your life the being of God, and then gradually you start to discover the subtleties.
Okay, Sister Denise, I think we unfortunately have to say goodbye to you today, but this was a fascinating subject because most of us are concerned with the vocabulary that we currently have to deal with the things that we can see and touch, and through which the senses give information, but you've actually opened up a whole new world of understanding for people who probably never thought of such things before. It's quite mind-blowing that an entire world can exist, of which we're an intrinsic part, for which we have almost zero understanding. So I think you've opened a door in the minds of many with what you've just shared. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, there you have it. Words for the intangible. Something quite fascinating. And when it comes to understanding yourself, when it comes to understanding God, these are intangible because the soul is non-physical, as Sister Denise shared, as is God. And so all the terminology that we use to describe or talk about the soul is not vocabulary that one necessarily finds in the local dictionary. So the best part of what Sister Denise shared today is simply because something is intangible does not mean that it's unknowable. And for many of us out there, we are unable to draw the distinction between the two, not because we do not want to know ourselves and because we did not want to know God, but we simply did not know how. And Sister Denise has opened a door as far as the subject is concerned. So do take some time to know yourself better and to know God better. And I do wish you everything of the best in your own spiritual journey. Thank you and goodbye.